The sky above Valora shimmered with 1,000 impossible colors, as though the atmosphere itself had decided to experiment with a mood ring. Kale trudged along the polished walkway that wrapped around the palace, muttering to himself about how the royal architects must have been both geniuses and pranksters at the same time. Honestly, he said, squinting at a hovering light prism that refused to stay in one place. Who needs stairs when you can just float in circles and almost break your neck trying to catch a railing? He caught himself mid-trip as a miniature hover drone zipped past, narrowly missing his shoulder. Oh, great surveillance bots, because nothing says welcome to the palace like the feeling of being watched by something smaller than a loaf of bread. Inside the grand hall, the alien queen stood on a raised platform, her long ears elegantly tilted in curiosity as she surveyed the ceremonial chamber. Her guards, all towering humanoid forms in shimmering armor, stood stiffly at attention, looking like statues that someone had carelessly left in the middle of a hallway. The queen's eyes, reflecting the swirling light from the crystalline ceiling, flicked toward Kale as he wandered in, still brushing imaginary dust off his tunic. "Human," she said, voice smooth and commanding, yet edged with something amused. "You appear entirely unprepared for palace protocol." Kale gave her a half-bow, his expression unreadable. "I'm fluent in chaos and mild sarcasm. Does that count?" Before the queen could reply, the alarms shattered the delicate hum of the palace, lights flickering violently as red streaks painted the walls. Kale's hands instinctively went to his side, fingers brushing the hilt of a plasma blade he barely knew how to activate. The guards shifted uneasily, then, almost in synchronized panic, turned and sprinted toward the exits. Kale blinked. Wait, what? The queen's eyes narrowed, and her ears twitched sharply. "Cowards," she hissed, though the word seemed almost foreign to her lips. She stepped closer to Kale, who was already inching toward her with the same expression humans had when they realized their cat had just knocked over the good crystal vase. A mix of horror and resignation. "Do not move." Kale, in his typical fashion, ignored half of her words and the other half he processed slowly. "Move, no moving, got it, mostly." He raised his plasma blade and positioned himself between the queen and the approaching threat, muttering, "I hope I remembered the instructions correctly. It was either slice with honor or pretend to look heroic." The first wave of marauders appeared, metallic limbs gleaming under the shattered ceiling lights. They had the sort of overconfident swagger that always precedes a spectacularly bad idea. Kale twirled his blade with the kind of reckless flair that suggested both danger and extreme incompetence, and surprisingly managed to deflect a barrage of energy blasts. "Really? That's your best shot? My grandmother dodges faster than that, and she's dead," he quipped, ducking behind a hovering security drone that had suddenly chosen that exact moment to malfunction spectacularly. The queen tilted her head, long ears catching a faint echo of amusement that she did not intend to feel. "You are peculiar human," she said, voice almost betraying a smile. Kale, noticing, bowed with unnecessary ceremony. "Peculiar, yes, but effective. That's my middle name. Well, not legally. My mother was not great with paperwork." As the fight continued, Kale improvised with chaotic brilliance. He kicked a fallen energy panel, which ricocheted a plasma bolt back into a marauder's chest with perfect comic timing. Another attacker slipped on the palace's gleaming floor and collided spectacularly with a hovering guard bot, which exploded in a shower of sparks and an oddly musical whistling sound. Kale ducked, rolled, and muttered, "I swear I did not plan that entirely." The queen, moving cautiously behind him, tried not to show the growing respect she felt for this human. His movements were reckless, sure, but somehow effective. Every taunt and joke was another layer of distraction for the enemy. He shouted, "Hey, is it me, or does your aim get worse the closer you are to a dramatic entrance? Seriously, work on it." And another plasma bolt veered away from him, striking a wall panel that melted into a puddle of glowing liquid. Kale gestured at it like it was part of the choreography. And scene. Even as danger raged around them, Kale managed to make quips about the palace decor, the marauders' questionable sense of fashion, and the sheer absurdity of standing heroically in the middle of what looked like a futuristic blender. The queen, for all her regality, could not help but let a small smile tug at her lips, her long ears flicking in amusement despite the chaos. Suddenly, a massive marauder, larger and more imposing than the rest, emerged from the shattered balcony doors. Its cybernetic arm extended with mechanical precision, targeting the queen. Kale, sensing the imminent disaster, slammed himself into the path, throwing his body like a barricade and muttering, "Not today, giant metal jerk. Not today." The impact knocked him to the floor, but the queen was shielded and Kale scrambled to his feet with a grin that was equal parts pride and insanity. See, human ingenuity. Mostly luck, but, it counts. The queen looked at him, long ears twitching with a mixture of shock, relief, and though she would not admit it, a budding admiration. "You are relentless," she said almost softly. Kale gave a mock bow, dusting imaginary dirt off his shoulders. "Relentless, charming, and occasionally modest. It's a package deal." Outside, the remaining guards peeked through shattered doors and broken windows, mouths agape, realizing that perhaps fleeing was not the only option, though none would dare admit it aloud. Kale, now panting but still muttering about how the floor really should have better grip for emergency situations, glanced at the queen. "So, you usually keep the guards around, or is today just an off day for loyalty?" The queen allowed herself a chuckle, sharp yet musical, her ears flicking with the rhythm of the laugh. "It seems, human, that today you are the palace's only shield, and perhaps the most entertaining one as well." Kale grinned, ignoring the incoming threat of another wave of marauders for the moment. "Entertaining, huh? I can live with that. Just try not to get shot while I do my thing." As the alarms continued to echo, Kale readied himself, taking another precarious stance between the queen and the advancing enemies. He muttered under his breath, "All right, Kale, time to be heroic, and hopefully survive long enough to hear a thank you note." The queen, noticing the tension mixed with absurd humor in his posture, allowed herself the smallest flicker of hope. Perhaps, she thought, in this human-esque recklessness, there was a strength that no trained guard or polished weapon could match. And so, amidst sparks, whirling drones, and a chorus of panicked alarms, Kale prepared to hold the line, shield the queen, and make the marauders regret ever underestimating the peculiar combination of human wit and chaotic bravery. He quipped one last time as a plasma bolt narrowly missed his head. "Next time, we pick a planet with less dramatic lighting." The queen's long ears twitched again, the faintest shadow of a smile curling her lips. For the first time, she felt that perhaps chaos, strangely, humorously, and dangerously, was exactly the shield she had been waiting for. Kale's boots squeaked against the polished floor as he herded the alien queen through the palace corridors, weaving between floating hollow screens that flickered in frantic, confused patterns. "Okay, step 1, he muttered, always keep your precious queen behind you. Step 2, make bad jokes to distract enemies. Step 3, survive." The queen, her long ears twitching in irritation, shot him a look that could have frozen lava. "Human," she said, voice sharp, "if you plan to survive, perhaps you should focus on the threats rather than on wordplay." Kale tilted his head, grinning. "Oh, threats, right, yes, got it. Threats are bad, humor is good, noted. Also, you might want to duck in a second, unless you're into spontaneous hair singeing." A volley of plasma rounds ricocheted down the hall from a pair of marauder snipers perched precariously on a hovering balcony. Kale dropped to the floor with dramatic flair, dragging the queen along with him. She landed gracefully, considering herself insulted that he assumed she would need assistance, while Kale muttered, "See, it's a tactical maneuver. I call it the human pancake, works every time." The queen's lips twitched in what could have been the faintest hint of a smile. "Human pancake, "How original," she said, shaking her head. "Your species is remarkable in its absurdity." Kale seized the moment, ducking behind a console as another volley of shots clanged against the wall. "Remarkable. I'll take that as a compliment. Usually, people just scream and die when they see me," he quipped. He tapped a series of buttons on a console, causing a panel to spin around and smack an incoming marauder, who tumbled backward like a clumsy puppet. "And that," Kale added proudly, "is how you turn a tech hiccup into performance art." They rounded a corner into the palace's aerial transit bay, where abandoned hovercrafts and experimental energy drones were strewn about like the aftermath of a very messy science fair. Kale gestured to the Queen, who raised a skeptical brow. "This way," he said, "is slightly less likely to get us vaporized, probably." He vaulted onto a dormant drone and pressed a button at random. It sputtered word, and then lifted them a few feet into the air before sputtering again and setting them down in a gentle, if somewhat chaotic, crash. The Queen tilted her head, long ears flicking with interest. "You trust machines you barely understand with my life?" she asked, voice carrying a note of incredulity. Kale shrugged, grinning. "Trust is overrated. Panic is the real enemy. Also, sometimes machines explode in convenient ways, which is kind of fun." They navigated the bay carefully, Kale making humorous commentary about every odd-looking contraption. "This one looks like it was designed by someone who watched too many holographic cartoons. And this one, well, this one just screams, 'Do not touch,' so naturally I'm touching it." The Queen, despite the stress of the attack, found herself chuckling, a sound so light it seemed almost alien even to her own ears. From above, a squad of marauders descended on anti-gravity platforms, their mechanical limbs extending in anticipation. Kale readied himself, raising the plasma blade with exaggerated caution. "Ah, look at that," he said. "The villains arrive fashionably late, always the worst choreographers in the galaxy." He leaped forward, deflecting blasts with a mix of improvised movements and sheer luck, occasionally rolling into a display console, which emitted a spectacular burst of sparks and holographic confetti. "See, celebration," he yelled, narrowly avoiding another plasma bolt. The Queen found herself instinctively moving in sync with Kale, her trust in him growing with each chaotic maneuver. He dodged a swinging mechanical arm, grabbed a loose hovercrate and flung it with wild precision, knocking two marauders off their platforms. Kale grinned at the Queen, panting. "That's teamwork. And by teamwork, I mean me being spectacularly lucky while you look majestic behind me." She allowed herself a small smile, long ears flicking in rhythm with the sound of Kale's panting. "You are infuriating," she said, though the word lacked any malice. Kale ducked another plasma shot, glancing at her. "Infuriating and protective. It's a combination that's oddly effective." He swung the drone's arm like a makeshift baton, knocking a marauder into a pile of sparking energy conduits. Sparks flew in a harmless but visually stunning arc. "Ta-da!" The Queen's voice cut through the chaos, calm and commanding. "Kale, follow me. There is a secondary passage to the upper archives. It may provide temporary safety." Kale saluted with his plasma blade, nearly impaling a nearby console in the process. "Roger that, Your Majesty. Lead the way. I will, follow mostly gracefully." They dashed through twisting corridors filled with holographic art installations that shifted with their movement, creating disorienting patterns that Kale used to his advantage. Marauders stumbled into the illusions, tripping over floors that seemed to move beneath their feet. Kale couldn't resist muttering, who knew psychedelic hallways could be so lethal? The Queen, moving with surprising agility for someone in ceremonial robes, began to feel the rhythm of the human's strange, unorthodox defense techniques. Every leap, every quip, every near miss seemed to synchronize with her own calculated movements. "Your methods are unorthodox," she said, voice almost wistful. Kale grinned, ducking a sudden plasma spray. "Unorthodox is code for slightly terrifying but kind of awesome." You get used to it. He grabbed a hovering storage crate and swung it like a pendulum, knocking marauders into one another in a chaotic, almost slapstick display. It's like dominoes, but with lasers. They finally reached the upper archives, a space lined with floating shelves of glowing data crystals and holographic scrolls. Kale slammed the door behind them, catching his breath. Phew, safe-ish, for now. He looked at the queen, who was adjusting her ceremonial cloak with quiet dignity. You know, it's weirdly satisfying to save someone and get told they're infuriating at the same time. Keeps the ego balanced. The queen's long ears twitched in amusement. You are insufferable, human, yet undeniably effective. I find myself reconsidering assumptions I have held about your species. Kale leaned against a shelf, wiping sweat from his brow. Reconsidering assumptions, huh? That's my favorite part of hero work. Well, that and the occasional dramatic dodge. You're welcome, by the way. The quiet hum of the archive's energy grids seemed almost peaceful compared to the chaos outside. Marauders prowled in the distant halls, but Kale had already started tinkering with a few idle drones, giving them minor modifications that might, if he didn't blow anything up, turn them into defensive distractions. All right, little buddies, he muttered to the drones, today we're heroes. Tomorrow, well, probably slightly crispy heroes, but let's focus on today. The queen watched, long ears flicking with both curiosity and amusement, as Kale continued to improvise, blending humor, reckless bravery, and odd tactical genius. Somehow, amidst the panic, the sparks, and the constant threat of death, a fragile camaraderie had formed between human and alien. Kale grinned at her, panting. You know, being a hero is exhausting. I think I deserve a medal, or maybe a snack, maybe both. The queen allowed herself a small, private chuckle. You are unpredictable, Kale, and yet I am strangely relieved to have you here. Kale winked, ignoring another distant blast outside. Relieved? Perfect. I can work with that. Now let's see if we can turn strangely relieved into completely invincible before the next group of marauders shows up. And so, in the quiet of the archives, surrounded by glowing data crystals and the occasional whir of errant drones, Kale and the queen prepared for whatever chaos awaited them next, their bond deepening through a mix of improbable heroics, reckless humor, and the unspoken understanding that they were now each other's shield against a galaxy that refused to play fair. The corridors of the palace trembled with the distant impact of energy blasts as Kale and the alien queen stepped into the central energy vault. The room glowed with the soft, dangerous hum of crystalline cores pulsing with power, their light reflecting in shards across the polished metal walls. Kale ducked instinctively as a plasma bolt ricocheted off a support strut, muttering, Yep, still the worst timing ever. And I thought my mornings were rough. The queen, long ears twitching with a mixture of irritation and faint amusement, walked beside him with a poised grace that made every step seem deliberate, as if she alone could command the energy that flowed through the vault. Kale raised an eyebrow. You're calm in the middle of potential obliteration. I respect that. Also, mildly jealous. My cool factor is usually limited to minor explosions and sarcastic quips. The queen didn't respond immediately. She was scanning the room, calculating positions, energy flow, and the likelihood that Kale's improvisation would either save or doom them. Finally, she said, Your humor. It is unbearable at times, human. Yet it distracts them more than my guards ever could. Kale grinned. Unbearable and effective. I'll take it as a compliment, probably. The marauders had regrouped, now in a more coordinated strike led by a towering cybernetic figure whose mechanical limbs glinted with a menacing precision. The leader's approach was theatrical, like some intergalactic stage villain, and Kale couldn't resist a comment. Ah, the big boss shows up. You know, for dramatic flair, you might want to work on your timing. Also, hair could use a touch-up, just saying. The queen allowed herself a brief flicker of a smile, the tension eased slightly by Kale's irreverence. She channeled energy from the crystalline cores, her hands glowing faintly, ready to unleash a defensive barrier. But she held back, knowing Kale's improvisation often required just enough room for chaos to play out. Kale noticed her pause and muttered under his breath, "Trust the human. Chaos is apparently tactical. Who knew?" As the marauders advanced, Kale threw himself into the fray with unorthodox agility. He flipped over hovering drones, rolled under energy conduits, and occasionally kicked a stray crate that sent a marauder spinning into another with a comical crash. "Precision strikes," he announced, narrowly avoiding a swinging cyberarm. Also minor chaos collateral oops. The queen, moving in tandem, added her own controlled bursts of energy, redirecting plasma bolts and destabilizing the marauders' formations. Together they created a rhythm, a strange, improvised dance of human recklessness and alien precision. "You are maddening," she said, voice carrying both frustration and admiration, "but effective beyond measure." Kale ducked another plasma blast and with a wink said, "Maddening and heroic. It's my brand." He spotted a cluster of marauders preparing a heavy plasma cannon aimed directly at the crystalline cores. He grabbed a hovering crate, flung it through a control panel, and sent a chain reaction of sparks and energy bursts that caused the cannon to misfire spectacularly. The blasts ricocheted, striking other marauders and forcing the remainder to scatter. "See, improvised heroics, you're welcome." The leader, growing impatient, lunged forward, cyber limbs extending with precision to strike. Kale barely managed to deflect the first strike, tumbling across the floor and muttered, "Yep, definitely needed more sleep before this fight." He sprang back, taking advantage of the leader's overreach, and sent him stumbling into the energy conduits with a well-aimed kick. Sparks flew in a dazzling display, illuminating the room like a pyrotechnic performance. The queen stepped forward, finally letting her full power surge, weaving a lattice of energy around Kale and herself, stabilizing the core's pulse and sending a resonating shock through the marauders that forced them to retreat. Kale, panting and disheveled, gave a triumphant, if exhausted, salute. "And that, Your Majesty, is how you turn chaos into victory." The queen observed him, her long ears flicking in admiration. "Kale, you have surpassed my expectations. Your recklessness is tempered by courage I did not anticipate." She stepped closer, her eyes meeting his, reflecting both relief and newfound trust. "Without you, this palace, perhaps none of us would have survived." Kale, brushing off the dust and sparks clinging to his tunic, gave a sheepish grin. "Well, I do aim to please. Also, slight ego boost from heroic survival is nice. Don't judge." He noticed the damaged drones flickering weakly, and with a sigh muttered, "All right, time to play repairman before anything else blows up." Again. Outside, the remaining guards had emerged cautiously from their hiding spots, clearly mortified by their earlier cowardice. The queen waved them off, indicating that Kale alone had earned her trust in this ordeal. Kale shot them a grin, muttering, "See, individual effort matters more than training manuals, and sarcasm helps." With the marauders finally routed, Kale guided the queen to the observation balcony. The city below was a fractured mosaic of lights and shadow, but the immediate danger had passed. Kale leaned against the railing, exhausted, and said, "You know, Your Majesty, saving the world is exhausting work. Also, highly overrated until you get a snack." The queen allowed herself a rare laugh, her long ears flicking in amusement. "You have changed since first entering these halls," she said, her tone quieter now. "Your bravery is reckless, but it is tempered by wit, resilience, and an adaptability our species often underestimates in humans." She studied him closely, as though trying to comprehend how chaos could become a shield. "I misjudged your species, and you specifically." Kale shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. "Judgment is overrated. Also, chaos is underappreciated. I like to think I made it look heroic, mostly." The queen's eyes softened, her long ears flicking once in a sign Kale would later learn was a rare gesture of approval. "You have earned my trust, and perhaps something more. Your loyalty, even when my guards fled, proved that courage is not the province of any one species. Kale for once didn't quip. He simply nodded, letting the weight of the moment settle. He realized that the journey had changed him. The reckless, solitary warrior had become something more, something bound by trust and shared experience. The adrenaline and humor would remain, of course, but so too would a deep respect for the queen and the bond they had forged amidst chaos. The city lights flickered as the palace systems began to stabilize, energy flowing through the crystal conduits without interruption. The remaining marauders were either captured or fleeing, their ambition thwarted by the unlikely combination of Kale's improvisation and the queen's power. Kale exhaled, leaning against a console and muttering to himself, "Well, that's done. Crisis averted. Also 0 fatalities on my side. Mostly luck, some skill, a dash of sarcasm. Recipe for survival." The queen joined him, her long ears brushing slightly against his shoulder in a rare, almost casual gesture of camaraderie. "Human," she said softly, "you have taught me that bravery is not measured by technique alone, but by the willingness to act despite uncertainty. And that laughter, even in the face of peril, is a kind of strength." Kale grinned a little sheepishly. "Laughter and lasers, Your Majesty, that's my philosophy. Also works well with explosions. Highly recommended." They looked out over Valora together, the ruins of conflict already settling into the calm of aftermath. The queen's guards approached, cautious but ready to follow her orders once more, and Kale knew that his place among them was no longer accidental. He had earned respect, trust, and perhaps unexpectedly, friendship with a being of immense power and wisdom. For the first time, Kale felt a quiet pride that had nothing to do with survival or clever quips. He had shielded the queen when others faltered, and in doing so, had discovered a new depth within himself. Courage tempered by humor, loyalty honed through risk, and a bond that defied the boundaries of species and expectation. As they turned to exit the vault, Kale grinned, muttering, "Next time, maybe a planet with fewer explosions, or at least better floor grip." The queen's laughter echoed softly behind him, long ears twitching with amusement and approval. And in that moment, amidst the sparks, the hum of energy, and the lingering traces of chaos, Kale realized that heroism was not just about survival. It was about connection, trust, and the unpredictable, messy, and wonderfully human way of facing the impossible. The palace settled into quiet again, the danger past, and Kale, standing beside the queen, finally allowed himself a small, genuine smile. Chaos had its place, humor its value, and courage, human or otherwise, was the force that could turn even the gravest peril into a story worth remembering. The bond forged in fire and laughter was unbreakable, and for both of them, the galaxy had shifted, forever altered by the human who had chosen to stand when all others fled.